Hi, I'm Matt Collins. I'd like to welcome you to Bob Weber Auto Mart on Douglas Avenue here in Racine, across from Douglas Park. We specialize in 1-year-old, low mileage, almost new cars. And if you'd like to stop by and see them, or see them on our website, bobweberautomart.com, we could save you between $5,000 and $10,000 on your next almost new car purchase.
I'm Michael Burke, and this is Money Talks. Hi, welcome to Money Talks, the Journal Times online business show. I'm business reporter Michael Burke, and today we're going to be talking about the state of commercial real estate with Ron Slaght of Pleasant Prairie. Ron, thanks for being on the show. What company or companies do you actually represent or work for?
I work with RE/MAX Newport and Newport Leasing and Property Management here in the Racine area.
Mm-hmm. And how long have you been doing this?
About 8-9 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, before that, I know you mentioned you were in the hospitality industry, and you had a couple of really interesting jobs. You were the club manager of the Kenosha Country Club for about a decade.
Right.
And just briefly, was that fun or challenging or what?
Both.
Okay.
Both.
And then you actually were one of 3 guys to bring Country Thunder USA to southeastern Wisconsin, which is a whole story in itself, I'm sure. And then you veered into what you're doing now, into commercial real estate. How'd you get into that?
Well, as working at the country club, and even before that, I networked with Joe Mrazek, who was the owner, of course, with Midwest Interstate Realty, and he
the late Joe Mrazek, who developed huge projects all around Racine.
Yes, and he brought me on board, and I worked with he and Lori Holfert, and got into business, and the rest is history.
How do you? So you came in, I presume, not knowing a whole lot about this field. How did you learn it?
Just watching and going to meetings and following a lot of my peers, and a lot of reading and going to a lot of school.
Mm-hmm. Now, what kind of license does that require? The same as any real estate agent would have?
Right.
But I'm sure it's a very different field than trying to sell a home. I assume, now we should define what kind of commercial real estate you typically do.
Mostly office space, medical space, and I dab in some industrial and some retail, but most of my space I deal in is office space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I assume, unlike trying to sell a home, you don't bake chocolate chip cookies in the building before they show up to look at it. I'm sure it's a very different analysis that goes on, because in a home, they're trying to create this emotional bond to the place and all of that. This has got to be a very dispassionate, very analytical sort of exercise when somebody looks at a commercial property, isn't it?
Probably a real good example of that, probably 50-60% of my clients I never see.
Is that right?
Never see them. I'm on the phone, I'm on the internet.
Wow.
And I deal nationally with a lot of big brokers, and they're looking for space for a client, and all of a sudden I'll get a call and they'll want me to send floor plans, et cetera, with them, and then we'll negotiate over the phone, and then they'll bring somebody locally in maybe to take a look through, but that doesn't even happen a lot. And
wow.
Yes, so there's very little passion when you never see the person.
Boy, I had no idea about that. Yep. When you, we'll get into some of the other differences, or how you do what you do and things like that, but when you look at our area, the greater Racine area, do you sort of carve it up into zones? Like somebody says, we want space, we want 10,000 square feet of space, or whatever the number might be, and how much guidance will they give you, in where they want to be?
That's, I think zoning is very important. Downtown, I look at it downtown, then I kind of categorize it Green Bay Road, west of Green Bay Road, and east of Green Bay Road, and that's pretty much what And most of the people in the national set, they kind of know where they want to be as ground zero, and then they say, what's available in this area? And then it's my job to go find that.
They don't carve it up north or south in any way?
Not too much. Not too much. A little bit. They have a ground zero where they want to be. They know where their marketing is going to be, what they want, and they come out.
So I'm guessing they will tell you, we'd like to be as, what have you got near 20 and 31 or 11 and 31, right? Those are the two,
Yes.
pretty much I mean, if you want your term ground zero, I would think both of those would somewhat apply, right?
That's probably the most asked for locations, correct?
Now, how does your, are you usually working on behalf of a seller of a property or on behalf of somebody who's looking for property? Or what's the split in those two?
Again, I probably work more on leasing properties out to create values of buildings. And then once we have the building filled, then it's my job probably to find an investor on the selling part of it. On the buying portion of it, I have someone who will call me right now. I have a person looking for a 20,000 square foot building that he wants to use for a school, for example.
What sort of school?
Well, it's mostly the new, a charter school on the voucher system type school. And then I just put another one in about to be 2 years ago into creative learning school. And so I do get calls, hey, Ron, I'm looking for 20,000 or 30,000 square foot. So then it's up to me to go look for, okay, where's ground zero at again? And that's kind of where would you like to be? And then we kind of go, because we're seeing this a pretty big area. And
now, in the case of a school, that doesn't sound like an easy task to find. You said 20,000 square feet, was it? That would be suitable for a school. So what kinds of guidelines do you have, or what must such a property have?
Well, yes, and that's always an issue, especially someone looking for school is probably, obviously they would like to buy it right, and so you have to look for a place that's got to be sprinkled. It has to have the right entrances and exits. It has to usually have the right handicap restrooms. It has to have plenty of parking. It should have a small playground or a place for the kids to go. It needs to have bus access, or a bus to be able to get around and turn around, all those areas. So
what about like kitchen or cafeteria issues?
Not necessarily.
Because you can build those in.
Correct. So you try to find something that has the least amount of build out to add on to the cost of the building. So, yeah.
How specific are they in location in this case?
In this case, not really specific.
Just Racine area or Racine County?
Area, correct.
Oh, yeah. So that's an example of a potential buyer. So what roughly is the split? Are you more often working on behalf of a seller, or more often somebody who's looking for space for something?
More looking for space.
Looking for space? Okay.
People are looking for space is what I do more often than not.
Now, you were involved in putting All Saints into the new clinic. Talk about that deal. First, explain where that is.
It's in the Renaissance Park area, right next to the brand new Grand Appliance.
So on the north side of 20.
It's on the north side of 20, and that space was sitting there empty. It was a spec building. The same owners of that building built the Grand Appliance store, and the store next to it just seemed like why not build another retail center? This would be a great fit to have something right next to Grand Appliance. Well,
but that wasn't happening?
Well, that was the beginning of the burst, and so therefore it sat empty for, I'm guessing, 5 years. So then there's a situation where a retail wasn't going to go there. There was plenty of retail space available in the Racine area. Sure. And who's going to drive out to that area? So there's a situation where you had to adapt the use of a building, and we're not doing anything with it. And then a broker that represented the Wheaton Franciscan All Saints were looking for a space to bring a clinic into the area. So the broker and I got together, and I must say at the beginning we were a long ways apart in price.
Did you immediately think of that building, or what?
No.
Or had they already
They had.
seen the building and
They
said,
had seen
what about that one?
Yes, that's a situation where the broker representing the All Saints was said, look at, I mean, they obviously looked at a lot of land and a lot of opportunities out of the land, and once they looked at that, and he and I got together, and it took a long time to do it. But
Why is that?
well, you're going back and forth with, you have to go in, and they had to do their due diligence. They had to make sure they could redo the zoning. They had to make sure that they could bring architects in there, and could we make this fit for what we need? And that took time, and once we got through that, and a few other financial.
How far apart were they on the asking? And
A lot.
yeah. So did this go on for many months or what?
Yes. I think that I started in December in 11, and I think we closed sometime in August, September and 12. So.
I'm guessing they're operating from there because I keep seeing their ads in our paper for the new physicians there.
I believe they did open that up, and I can't say for sure, but I know that they put a lot of work into that.
Yeah. Who are some of the sellers that you work on behalf of and try to place tenants in?
The sellers could be many people, banks, number one, and people developers who have purchased buildings. And
You said banks number one. Is that because of foreclosures or what? All right.
yeah, I sell properties for banks. Sold in this town, I think I've sold, not a lot, but 4 or 5, 6, 7 buildings.
Okay, so banks. You said then developers who have.
Developers have purchased these buildings,
Is that typically a recent purchase or not necessarily?
No. It takes time to build up value. They're going back to try to maybe answer your question regarding the difference between residential and commercial. There's an example right there. The values of buildings in the commercial side is really only the worth what income is bringing it in.
Sure.
The brick and mortar and the beauty of the building really is worth not a lot. But the money's coming in versus a home. I'm going to live there. It's worth this much to me, and I'm willing to pay that. Where to get a person to sell a property in the commercial side of it, it has to have income. So in order to get a buyer for that, it has to have income, what they call it on a cap rate, and where that person who's going to buy that gets a good return on their investment. And that's sometimes in today's market where there's always distance, because a buyer wants to pick it up where he's going to have a good, reasonable income, and a seller wants to sell it where he wants to get a good return on his money. So sometimes those two are a little ways apart.
What's a property that we might recognize that you've either placed tenants into, other than the one we just talked about, the All Saints, but what was a foreclosure? Can you think of a building that people might recognize?
I think the 7200 building where the dermatologist is on, that was a foreclosure.
What's 7200? What's the address of that?
Let's see, 7200 Washington, right next to Harley Davidson. That was a building that was foreclosed on a bank, and the bank sold that at a.
What had that been before? I can't picture that
It
building.
was a dermatologist was in there. The
The one right on. Okay,
It's
so
a real-
right near Case High School there.
Yeah, it's a real high-profile type building.
Yeah.
That would be one.
And is there something else in there now? I don't recall.
It's medical. There's let's see what else. I got to think about that a minute. There's some insurance companies in there.
Oh, okay. And you found the
And
tenants for that?
actually, there's an appraisal company in there. We just put those people in there as well.
And then you were saying that, so your job is to first create an income stream with tenants, so you're looking for tenants. How do you go, it's one thing to have somebody asking for space for a school or a clinic, but now on the building side, you have this building. How do you find tenants out there? How do you beat the bushes?
That's a very good question, and that's something we ask ourselves all the time in our group, is that, okay, how do we market this building? So we kind of break it down 3 ways. One, nationally, regionally. So how do we advertise nationally, or maybe go back to locally? And locally, believe it or not, signs do the best job for us. people driving by.
Mm-hmm.
So they see the sign, and then, but nationally and locally, we have all kinds of marketing, and usually you use national big companies such as groups called Xceligent, CoStar, LoopNet, big groups like that.
Some of these websites where somebody who wanted space in a community would go and look at what's available,
And
right?
the reason, the way that works is that, say you have somebody nationally, and they usually hire a major broker to go, okay, I want space in Racine. That broker then goes and looks on these different lines, Xceligent, LoopNet, whatever, and say, okay, who has properties in this area? And then they look at it and they'll see your name, or they'll see something and they call you.
Yeah.
So that's why it goes back to the originally 50-60% of the people I talk to, I don't see.
Yeah. It's my perception that there's a lot of space out there, a lot of vacant space. How true is that? And where is it truest that there's a surplus of space, and where is it not so much? In what categories?
Well, first of all, space is, again, I break it down into office space, industrial space, and retail space.
I know there's a lot of retail.
There is, and there isn't. Strip centers, of course, being probably the highest. I've seen a figure from LoopNet that's staggering, the amount of.
How much?
Well, it's over 50%.
Yeah, well.
Vacancy is what I've seen.
In what geographic area?
Racine.
Okay.
Racine. Probably a space that looks like there's an awful lot of space is office space. When we look at space, we have a breakdown. We don't look at much under 15,000 square feet in order to get continued percentages to see what's available. And really in the Racine area, I think space over 15,000, there's only 4.25% vacancy rating.
Okay.
Which is very low. Does that take into consideration like the 500 and 1,000 to 2,000 little stores on the side? Well, if it's owner occupied, we probably don't take that into consideration because it fluctuates too much.
What has changed for you since the Great Recession happened in just with how the transactions work and how the discussions go when somebody's the tenant and landlord are talking?
Well, probably the biggest is the tenant build-ups. So, and before that, the landlords or the owners of buildings would say, okay, here's a white box, and it would be up to the landlord to spray, paint it nicely and have a floor. It even could be a cement floor and a ceiling and lights, and then it would be up to the tenant to come in and do the build-up at their cost, their dime. Today, because of the vacancies that are out there and the incentive for landlords to own these, it's in the best interest of the tenant now. It's in their park that they can come in and basically say, okay, if you do this, this, and this, we will consider you. And so now the landlord now has to do a lot of build-outs. Also, free rent is they look for that.
Free rent for what period of time?
It depends on the length of the lease. I've seen it 1 month, 2 months, 6 months, 12 months.
Wow.
So if you get a 10-year lease, I've seen it up to as much as a year free rent.
So the power balance has totally shifted to the lookers now. What about the actual rents themselves? How do you think they compare now in commercial property?
Overall, 25 to 30% less.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Interesting. Downtown, I know, has a lot of office space. What do you foresee happening with that? And of course, we have the Zons building is a whole different story in itself. Vacant since 1981. But for normal office space, what do you think might happen with that, or what should happen, or what could happen?
Well, the best example I can, what you're really asking me, I'm guessing, is whether you see these signs in front of office space that's been sitting there empty for a long period of time, and what do you do with that space?
Yeah.
I mean, if you can
downtown or elsewhere. Let's broaden the question a little bit.
Okay. Well, what downtown Milwaukee is a good example. What they're doing more and more of is they're adapting to a reuse. In other words, maybe this is not an office building. Maybe it's not what people are looking for. It's too small, too big. The landlord doesn't want to put the money into it. What do you do with it? And so what they're doing in Milwaukee, believe it or not, they're changing a lot of them to actually apartment buildings. Where,
Is that an easy conversion? Or?
well, if they have the water in it and
Meaning sprinklers.
sprinkler system, or not even maybe sprinkler, if it has a restroom in it, water in it, you can convert those to a bedroom and a kitchen and a living area pretty easy. And it wasn't an office building. And the interesting thing about that is that you have people looking for a place to live, and sometimes the rents are too high, where you can move into this here storefront pretty reasonable, and that's what they're doing. And the interesting, like down again Milwaukee and maybe Racine and maybe downtown Kenosha, you have people that are willing to live in there because they're close to the job, they don't have a car, and they can just walk.
Maybe on a bus line and all those things.
Line, et cetera. Right. So
Yeah.
I see that, and even downtown Racine, the example for reuse is Borders. I mean, that's a reuse. They've converted that into something a little on a higher scale.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was not your question, but a reuse of an office building changed to, and retail is not always the answer. So what else do you do with it?
Yeah. Well, Ron Slatt, believe it or not, we're already out of time. I told you the 20 minutes would go by fast. But thanks a lot for being here, and maybe we'll have to have you back in another era, another time. You've been watching Money Talks. I'm business reporter Michael Burke for the Journal-Times. Thanks to our producer, Scott Anderson, today, and please watch us again. So, thanks.
You're welcome.